Okay, today I'm going to talk about a film, the Kodak Pro Image 100, which is basically it's a color negative film, 35 millimeter, that was also named Profoto 100. You could find it on different markets under that name. You also could find rolls of 120 film, but I don't think we find them anymore. Might come back, maybe, but never found one myself. So it's 100 ISO rated sensitivity. It's one of the last films Kodak developed, and it was supposed to be quite resistant to temperature and humidity, which made it pretty good for keeping for storage. Not so good conditions. Its development process is under C41 chemistry, so quite classic for color. And it's kind of supposed to be the cheapest in the pro line of films at Kodak. And yeah, it's not that known. It's starting to be known, but it's been on the market since 1997 in Asia, but it took him quite some time to get to Europe and started coming on the market in 2018 and then 2019 in the USA. And it's one of my favorite films. It's relatively, how do you say, normal. It kind of works for everything. It's a really great workhorse. And those two first pictures, I'm going to show some examples. I mean, the technical information you'll find online if you want more information about that film. But let's try to show the results. So basically, that's with a compact camera, the Olympus XA. A rangefinder camera from Olympus from the 1980s with a very good lens, 35mm 2.8. And as you can see on the left image, that's an uncropped result. And on the right, that's simply a crop to see a little bit better the grain of that film. So it's a really precise film. It's quite neutral in its color rendering capacity. But yeah, it really gives something. It works, for me, it kind of worked in every situation. In this picture, it's in the early morning, so basically the sun is behind. So you can see that the rendering of warm colors works really well. The color balance is quite good. I really tried not to modify digitally the images, but it's always hard when you go from analog, when you do a digital presentation. Obviously, you have to scan the film, do some basic process. So I've tried to minimize it. I only kind of worked on sometimes a little bit on the color balance, but mainly on the low and the highlights to get the most out of the film. But as you can see on those two pictures, the greens are there, the blue work well. It's relatively neutral rendering of that scene. Again, two pictures done with Olympus XA. In very strong highlights. So obviously here's the camera the XA is a aperture priority camera, so the exposure time is managed by the camera, but which is pretty good on this picture. But if you maximize and you have a good camera and maximize the film according to its sensitivity, you actually get some really good results even in very strong contrast situations and very warm lights. Or as you can see on the right, in more subdued lighting situations where the contrasts are pretty low, actually. A really gray day with rain, with not that much warmth in the scene. You can see that the greens are really good. There's a really good range of colors. Here in those two next pictures, that's with an EOS 5 camera, so it's not the 5D, obviously, it's with film. It was that camera in the 1990s that Canon came out with, which would follow your eye for the focus point. A really great camera, still use it. And here two situations using this film. On the left, obviously with tungsten-like lights and probably some sunlight coming from behind. So really works well with relatively high contrast and warm scenes. And on the right, that's using the flash from the EOS 5. So colder lights, that's in the parking lot, manages really well the high contrast too, but also all the other kinds of colors in the range. and the grain again is relatively fine, and it gives a character. We can imagine, we can see it, but it's really not bothering at all. As I said before, to me it's a really neutral film. Here on those two pictures again, on the left, that's obviously a tomato sauce, but you can see that the reds, the oranges really come out nice, and at the same time the coldness of the metal underneath and the highlights. The information is there, the chemistry reacts well. And on the right, that's a picture, actually a selfie. We can say a self picture. During the pandemic, I was working in a medical facility at that time, and that's with a small amount of flash, the US5, obviously taking an out of focus picture of me, and I think the color rendering in a cold situation again, and the skin tones are quite right, works well. Here's three examples made with a Leica MDA camera. So the MDA camera is basically a Leica M camera without the rangefinder part. It's just the film and the shutter mechanism. And that camera was made for labs and was connected to basically fixed focus systems or microscopes. But you could also attach a whole system that transformed the camera into a reflex camera, which was made by Leica with specific lenses. And that's what I've used here. So I might do a video on the Leica MDA, a separate video. But and here I actually did some macro photography using a Leica, probably a 50mm Summilux 1.4 lens. But these examples are, I think, nice because they give a good idea of how the film reacts to colors and how smooth this film can be with those different palettes of colors, with those dried flowers. Here, same thing with two pictures of the sky. It's the same equipment, Leica MDA, but here I'm probably using one of those tele lens from Leica of the time of the 1980s and 90s, which was a Telid 560 or something like that. So, but just a good example of how grays and blues come out, and how the highlights and clouds can come out, the precision of that film. I think that's an interesting example. Again, it's one of my go-to films. I usually have it in reserve. And here's those two pictures again, macro. On the left, just for the anecdote, that's one of my first cameras, a Nikon FE with a 50mm 1.2 lens. The classic one, not the Nikkor. I thought this gives you also a good idea of the grain and how it reacts to blacks, to whites, to subtle changes of color, like on the right with this mimosa. Let's go back to some more compact cameras. That's the Canon MC. It's a camera I've done a video about. It's really a super pocketable autofocus, auto exposure camera with a decent lens, some good character, and it's super easy to use when you're on the go. So I think this film, the Pro Image 100, is a great film to have in one of those cameras, because it's you don't know what to expect when you travel, and it's a film that's going to react pretty well at every thing you throw it at. So on the left, that's from the car with the flash, a scene I found interesting. The colors are, in my opinion, they're fine. There's a good rendering, even so the contrasts are high. On the right, the more natural situation outdoors, that's northeast of Switzerland, probably the border with Germany or Austria. Simply a river scene in the afternoon, not so contrasty, but you see the colors and the details are there. It's a really nice film. Again, here with Canon MC, the picture on the left gives a good idea of what happens with low lights, the details. So obviously it's film. When you get used to digital photography with modern sensors, you like to have lots of information in the low lights, but that's not the case with film. Film likes overexposure usually, not underexposure, but it's still a pretty good rendition of the scene with using this film. And on the right, I found this image interesting because there's lots of colors. You have some strong colors with the tag, but you also have the organic greens and browns and the mineral concrete behind. As you can see, this film is quite polyvalent. Here's the two pictures. Change of camera. That's an M6 Leica M6 TTL camera, so rangefinder camera. The picture on the left I found interesting because that's the start of the roll, which I've basically exposed because it was inside the box, and the first shot is half exposed correctly. And I like the way it gives us a good idea of the kind of colors you have in reserve inside the film. Really interesting chemistry. And on the right, I think this film gives great browns and earthy tones. As you can see here, we'll have another example after. Here again with the Leica M6. That's a flea market in Geneva, Switzerland, and all those colors are pretty. They're not that intense like you would find with Portra or other films, which tend to boost the colors. It's really a really nice neutral rendition of colors with lots of detail, subtle grain, which gives a good character, it's a good nature to the film, to the photos. As you can see on the photo on the right, the colors come out good, low lights too, highlights too. And this last picture, again going back to those ochre-like colors, brown, earthy likes, the warm colors, they come out really great with this film. It's a really polyvalent film. I highly recommend it. So if you've never tried it, it's maybe got less character than other films, but it's a really ready to any situation you can give it kind of film. So highly recommended. If you have questions or comments, as usual, don't hesitate below, and see you next time.